Living Hope thought for the day. As we have made our journey through a number of Bible books, today we come to the second book of Kings. One of the things we said in a previous thought for the day about the kings was that in the midst of the chaos and the sadness of the divided kingdom, God is raising up prophets, people who will bring the word of God and will stand up and proclaim boldly that there's only one true God. In 1 Kings, that's Elijah. But in 2 Kings, we start to see the emergence of Elijah's successor, Elisha. Now, there's a situation that develops in 2 Kings chapter 4, where a widow comes to Elisha, and she's really troubled because she is a widow and she has huge debts. And she's just sort of wondering, how am I ever going to solve this? Now, it seems that Elisha knew her husband. They had some relationship. And Elisha notices that she's just got one tiny jar of oil. And he brings a word of revelation, quite an amazing word. He says, I want you to gather as many jars as possible and to bring them into your house. And that's what she does. Sorry. That's what she does. She brings ever so many jars into the house. And as she brings those jars in, Elisha then says, look, I want you to pour from that little jar of oil into the other jars. Now, I guess she must have thought, whatever is he asking me to do? That seems utterly ridiculous. But that's what he asked her to do. And as she starts to pour, she finds that her little jar is not empty. And she pours, and her little jar is not empty. And she pours, and her little jar is still not empty. And every jar that's been gathered is filled with oil. Elisha says, any more jars? And she says, well, no, they're absolutely exhausted. The empty jars, I've got no more. And he says, all right, now what you need to do is to take those jars that you have seen miraculously filled, and you sell the oil in those jars, and with the money you'll be able to pay your debts. It takes a real prophet of God to bring a word like that, because if he got it wrong, what grief and pain for the widow to be cluttered up with all those jars and no oil in them. And that would have just been a dreadful thing. But no, she obeys the prophet of God. The prophet of God has obeyed God because God told him to do that. It wasn't his idea. An enormous provision results. Of course, we see here the beginnings, the seed of something that's going to be revealed in the New Testament. Jesus is going to take water and turn it into wine. Jesus is going to take 5 loaves and 2 fishes and multiply them to feed a crowd. What we see among many stories in the second book of Kings is that God is a God of incredible provision. And for those who are poor and for those who are needy, if we trust in God, if we do his will, then he will provide. He may not provide all that we would want, but he will certainly provide all that we need. And that's what the widow discovers. And so she and her son can live without the harassment of debtors knocking on her door, making their demands. She's now going to be in a place where she is able to hold her head high. This provision gives her dignity and hope. God will provide for you too as you step out and trust him with the little that you have. He will meet your need. God bless you.